Hello and welcome, Lynx here, and we are playing Unnatural Urges. 2 years later. Let's see. Oh boy, Haruna Masaomi was dying? No! He lay on his back on his futon, staring with vacant eyes at the ceiling. His vision was starting to blur. It had been failing him for the last couple of years, but now everything looked vague and half-formed. His own bedroom was almost unfamiliar to him. So indistinct he might as well have been viewing it through a thick film of fog. Alright, honestly, I did not expect this episode to start like this. Masaomi wasn't doing anything strenuous, he was only lying down. But it was worryingly hard for him to breathe. It felt like a wave was pressing on his chest, one which forcefully drove the air from his lungs. Weakly the old man gasped and hacked, his emaciated body shuddering. He was now so unwell that health seemed like a little more than a distant memory, for the illness had come about relatively quickly. It had all begun a week prior, when Masaomi had begun to cough. He had thought little of it in the beginning. He was used to catching various illnesses, but as the days passed, his cough had grown steadily worse. It had been 3 days after the onset of his cough that he had begun to feel flushed and feverish, for that he had begun to cough up blood. Oh boy, that's already a terrible sign. Now, over a week into his ailment, he was so drained he could not sit up on his futon. For the last couple of days, Masaomi had done little more than lie there, sleeping in fits and bursts, waking only to sip the cool barley tea which Rinka brought to him. Rinka had been very good about all of this. She had gone to the village for Masaomi's sake, despite his cautioning when it became apparent Masaomi wasn't going to recover. She had gone searching for a physician who might tend to him, but her best results had been met with failure. Nobody had wanted to come and visit Haruna Masaomi and the insistence of Demon, not when he had been a stain in the community for 3 years. Rinka had returned in tears, for she had tried to swallow them down when she sat by Masaomi's side. "It will be alright," she told him in a voice which wavered, a voice which made it apparent she knew it wouldn't be. "We don't need them anyway, can take care of you." Masaomi had thanked Rinka for her kindness, but had little faith in her abilities to nurse him. Masaomi had been ill many times before, but he had never been ill quite like this. He felt utterly exhausted, even more so than he had as a young boy. In his youth, Masaomi had got every strain of pneumonia that was going around, much to his parents' despair. His parents had called numerous physicians to check up on their sickly young son, and their outlooks had for the most part been grim. Few thought he would live into adulthood, not even his own mother and father. Masaomi had been able to defy all of their expectations, however. He had lived for much longer than anybody had anticipated. He outlived his parents, his 2 older brothers, and his wife. I mean, he's in his 60s, yeah. Maybe comparing his life to his brothers is in a way unfair, given that they, you know, died in a war, but yeah. Now, Masaomi was 62. He was much older than anybody had ever imagined he would grow to be, but this no longer felt like enough. He had only been afforded 3 years with Rinka. 3 years which had passed in the blinking of an eye. Masaomi had wanted to spend more springs with her, more summers, more autumns, and more dark, cold winters too. I freaking love winters. He had wanted to see her growing older. He wanted to watch her growing into her own person. Masaomi had so desperately wanted to see her picking up new hobbies, making new friends, living her own life. But perhaps this had been wishful thinking. Other than canon, nobody in Higashikawa would give Rinka a chance. Rinka's existence had been isolated, and perhaps it had been lonely, but Masaomi had still wanted her to be happy. He had done everything he could to keep her safe, to let her know that she was loved. But his time was fast running out. Masaomi's illness was awfully persistent. It had sunk into his lungs, robbing him of his air, forcing him, when he tried to inhale, to cough instead. He had been coughing a lot lately, and every single coughing fit left him feeling even weaker than before. He felt like a shell of a man. His arms and legs had shrunk remarkably in only a week because he had been unable to eat. And now he feared he looked more like a collection of kindling bundled into a kimono than a man. He didn't want Rinka to remember him like this, so infirm he could not sit himself upright. But he was grateful nonetheless that Rinka did not shrink away from him, even in his sickened state. Fearful foe she must have been, Rinka didn't avert her eyes from Masaomi in his final moments. She didn't leave him. Determinedly, loyal almost to a fault, she continued to sit by his side, her hand clutching his. Masaomi appreciated that, but he feared what Rinka would do after he passed on. She would continue to live, and that, Masaomi feared, was much more frightening than what was to occur to him.
Rinka.
Masaomi addressed Rinka when he was next able. His coughing had subsided for the present at least, and though his voice was faint and whispery, he was able to articulate himself well enough. Masaomi was uncomfortably aware, however, of the constraints of time. There was a lot he wished to say to Rinka, but he feared he wouldn't be able to articulate it all. There was too much to say and too little time. It was impossible to condense the last 3 years into a 3-minute, or even a 30-minute speech. But he could at least try. That was one of Masaomi's greatest strengths. He had always tried, no matter how improbable his odds seemed.
I wish I could have spent more time with you. The years I passed with you brought me so much joy. You might not be a human, but you're still the daughter that Mariko and I always wanted. Mariko was never able to meet you, but I'm sure if she had, she would have loved you just as much as I do. You really do mean the world to me. But I don't have much time left. I can't keep looking after you however much I want to.
Masaomi's face contorted as he spoke the simple truth, not with physical pain, for he did age, and awfully, but with fear for Rinka's sake. What was to become of her? The thought weighed upon Masaomi even more heavily than his illness, making it hard for him to breathe, much less speak.
I know that you won't be accepted the way you are now, not by the village or by society. We might live in a world full of change and technological advancements, but people are still people, no matter how many fancy gadgets they have or nice clothes they wear. They can accept rice cookers and colored photographs and all sorts of things I could only dream about as a boy. But they still can't accept kind little girls like you. I wish that wasn't the case, but...
Masaomi coughed weakly, his body convulsing. He had grown so sick and so wasted, his skin had turned grey, and it clung to his face like a mask. There was so much he wished to say, yet he found it difficult to get out the words. What he fretted, must Rinka have been thinking? She must have been so afraid, the poor girl, of how his sickness was making him deteriorate, but still she continued to stay with him. She had not moved. That meant more to Masaomi than he could articulate, even as his vision blurred.
Masaomi! Masaomi!
And everything began to turn dark. Rinka's perspective.
Masaomi! Masaomi!
Rinka stared at her surrogate father anxiously, her red eyes wide. He had been talking lucidly enough before, but now his eyelids had fallen shut, his chest heaving and falling from the effort of inhaling. If it weren't for the shifting of his chest and the pain rattle of his breathing, Rinka would have thought him dead already. This did little assuage her worries, however. Panic had begun to grip her, cold, hard panic, which seized hold of her heart like an icy claw. Rinka had been sitting with Masaomi for 3 days, rising on to prepare him cups of cool barley tea to damp his lips, but for all of her best efforts, Masaomi was still dying. Rinka could tell quite plainly that he was dying. Rinka had never seen a person die before, but it was an unmistakable sight. She would have known Masaomi was unwell even if he'd been sitting up on his futon, smiling because of the stench of death which hung about her, thick and heavy like a blanket. It smelled of sweat and unwashed sheets, and a sickly sweet incense Rinka had taken to burning to help clear the air. It smelled of decay, poorly masked by the fragrance of hibiscuses. It smelled of the end.
Masaomi, please!
Rinka gave Masaomi's withered hand a squeeze, praying for a miracle. Praying just as fervently, if not more so, as she had when the summer sky had been full of shooting stars. She stared and she stared, trembling, until... Feebly Masaomi coughed. His eyelids slowly opened. Everything Masaomi did now was slow, and he smiled.
Oh, my apologies, Rinka. It seems I nodded off for a moment. It was quite rude of me, especially when we were having a conversation. I'm sorry you have to see me like this, dear. My behavior really is quite shameful. No, it's alright.
Rinka tried to reassure Masaomi, for it, of course, wasn't alright. How could it be when Masaomi was dying? Every part of Rinka screamed that things were not alright. From her last eyelash to the dirt underneath her nails, but what was she to do? She had tried everything she could. She had sat by Masaomi and slept by him and tried to make him comfortable, but it wasn't enough. She had no training when it came to medicine and knew little of how human bodies worked, save for the fact they were frailer than her own and more susceptible to disease. Other than that, Rinka was completely lost. Maybe things would have been alright if the doctor had consented to seeing Masaomi, but his maid had slammed the door in Rinka's face. Damn, even her? Come on! Nobody had wanted to help. Masaomi was dying, but even now, the villagers were determined to shun him. Was this how it would end? With Masaomi on his back, breathing his last, knowing that everybody in the village had abandoned him. There is one person who didn't. Rinka didn't want that. She couldn't accept that, but accept it. She had to. It was her new reality. It wasn't alright at all, but Masaomi was still going to die.
I'm the one who should be apologizing.
Rinka spoke softly, her fingers squeezing Masaomi's own a little too tightly, tight enough to hurt.
It's because of me that nobody will come and see you. If I wasn't here, if you hadn't taken care of me, then the physician would have come, maybe he could save you. You'd still have a chance, but now... Now I consider myself very fortunate.
Masaomi smiled weakly. It shouldn't have been a very convincing smile. Not when it had become so alarmingly emaciated. But there was a real warmth in his eyes which imbued his words with an unexpected earnestness. Did he really consider himself fortunate? Rinka found that hard to believe when he was in such a dire state, but if he could smile like that...
What's so fortunate about all of this? I don't get it. Oh, it's not so complicated, really. I simply consider myself fortunate to have met you. My life has been a lot better since you arrived, so don't apologize for being with me. You made the last 3 years worth living. But if it wasn't for me, you'd have many, many more years left to live. You could get better. This wouldn't have to be the end. Yeah, maybe you're right. If the physician would tend me, perhaps I could live a bit longer. But it would be a hollow, empty life, and I would still be on my own. You've brought new meaning into my life, dear Rinka. And I wouldn't trade what we have for a few more years of solitude. That doesn't sound like a fair exchange. to me?
Masaomi! Rinka's eyes welled with tears, for she tried to quell them. She gave his hand another squeeze, more in an attempt to reassure herself than Masaomi. He was the one lying on the futon. He was the one racked with pain. But Rinka was the one who was shaking. She couldn't help herself. For she appreciated Masaomi's kindness. She wished he had never been forced to choose between her or his own health. It seemed a ghastly sort of thing to consider, but life was often uncomfortable. Rinka had been shielded from the worst of life's ills by Masaomi, but even then she knew full well how unfair the world could be. It really wasn't fair that Masaomi should be in such a state. But he was, and there was nothing Rinka could do about it. She had never before felt more helpless.
Now look, I've been doing some reading. Ever since I took you in, I wanted to learn more about demons and about your capabilities.
Huh?
I knew this day would eventually come and that we would be parted. For not even I thought it would happen quite so soon. This is rather unfortunate. But it is no matter.
No matter. Rinka stared at Masaomi, stunned into silence. How could he lie there on his deathbed, so pale and so shrunken, and say it was no matter? He must have been trying to reassure her, but it didn't work. More tears began to bat in Rinka's eyes, tears which she wiped away aggressively with the trailing sleeve of her kimono. She wished Masaomi wouldn't try so hard to be strong for her. Why could he not show her a moment of weakness? He was quite literally dying. Rinka wouldn't have blamed him for it. But he mustn't have wanted to worry her. Even until the end, Masaomi was thinking about nothing but Rinka.
During my reading, I discovered something interesting. I don't know how true this is, but I read in a curious volume of folk stories that demons can become humans if they eat the heart of a human themselves.
What? Rinka stared at Masaomi, stunned. She was so shocked that she forgot all of the words she had learned while living with Masaomi, forgot how to speak. All she could do was sit there as the rain continued to fall against the slate roof. Rinka's face, which was already pale, turned the same color as floor. She was shaking, but Masaomi wasn't finished yet.
I don't know if this is true, like I said, but I don't think it can hurt to try it. I'm going to die anyway. I won't need my heart when it stops beating. But you will continue to live on, Rinka. You will still be alive. And I want you to live as happily as you can. If sacrificing myself for you could improve your future prospects, then I would do it in a...
Heartbeat? Weakly, Masaomi laughed, his chest rising and falling with feebly.
In a heartbeat, so to speak. I don't mind giving myself up for you. I've already given you my time. Giving you a body is not such a great step after that. I'd rather give you all of me, Rinka. That is part, after all, of being a parent. What? No!
Rinka stared at Masaomi in stunned horror. His body convulsed with a series of particularly dry, hacking coughs as he managed to expunge his lungs from his throat. His face, which was ashen, seemed to turn even paler like snow. Masaomi's breath started to rattle inside his chest, just like a bag of bones being shaken after a funeral service. It sounded as if every inhalation was a struggle, as if every breath might very well be his last. Masaomi groaned painfully, piteously, and Rinka's own heart twisted inside her chest as he did. Rinka didn't want him to leave her, and yet...
Masaomi!
And yet...
Masaomi, please, don't leave me! Rinka, please. I can't do anything else for you. but I would like at least to give you a gift as a die. I want you to be safe. And I would even be willing to give my body up for it. That's how much you mean to me. I'm sure any father would do the same for his daughter. If you promise to eat my heart when I'm dead, then I'll be able to pass away without any regrets. I know it's a big ask, but can you do it? If not for you, then for me. Please. Won't you honor the last request of a desperate, dying old man? Masaomi!
Rinka trembled. Her revulsion towards Masaomi's macabre idea hadn't relented, but she couldn't pull away from him. These were Masaomi's final moments, and this, indisputably, was Masaomi's final request. He just wanted Rinka to be happy. He was prepared to go to any length to make her happy, even as she lay dying. To refuse his wishes now would be to doom him to die in agony, fearful of Rinka's future. She didn't want that. She wanted it even less than she wanted to sink her teeth into Masaomi's heart. What Masaomi wanted was unusual, but there was nothing cruel about it. His face, as he looked up at Rinka, was soft and gentle, so much so it made Rinka gasp. She could hardly believe what she was about to do, could hardly bring herself to agree to something so awful bad.
If that's what you want, then...
Rinka swallowed. She looked down at Masaomi's lined face, which was so very pale, so full of pain, and said,
Alright, I promise.
Masaomi didn't reply to Rinka's promise. Perhaps he no longer had the strength. He really did look very thin in his kimono, and very frail. For he opened his mouth, no words came out. Instead, he exhaled, a dry, defeated sort of sound, which put Rinka in mind of the breeze when it passed through the trees at night. Then there was nothing. Masaomi's eyelids fell shut slowly, heavily, as if weighed down by iron, and he never spoke again. He had breathed his last, but that he had done so with a smile. Had Masaomi's death been a peaceful one? Had he been satisfied in his last moments? That he had done all he could for Rinka? That he would continue to do all he could for her even after his death? Rinka wasn't sure. She didn't know what Masaomi was thinking, or had been thinking rather, before he had succumbed. But she wanted to believe that he had passed on without any regrets. She wanted to believe that in death he had been happy. Then perhaps she could continue to live on, just as Masaomi had wanted. He had wished for nothing more than save Rinka's own happiness, but tears began to bat in Rinka's eyes regardless. She couldn't help herself. Rinka slumped forwards, sobbing as hot, wet tears coursed down her cheeks. They were salty and they stung her eyes, so she sniffed. Rinka would have wiped her eyes with her arm, but she hadn't the strength for it, and neither could she see the point. Why bother trying to dry her tears when they would continue to fall? She wept bitterly on and on. Over Masaomi's body, her back bent. Lying forwards, her fingers curled against the front of his kimono, she shuddered. She could smell Masaomi when she inhaled. Not just the raw, unwashed scent of sweat and of his death, but of something softer than it. Something sweeter. She thought she could smell, however faintly, the aroma of sandalwood and of the falling rain. That was how Masaomi had always smelled of her. The forest during a rainstorm, which continued to hold firm no matter how fierce the weather. Masaomi had found Rinka on a stormy night just like this, when his garden had been half flooded, the ceremonial pond bursting into banks. The rain had brought Masaomi into Rinka's life, and now it was taking him from her. It didn't feel like an act of cruelty, however, imposed upon her by the gods. Instead, it felt like the natural way of things. Life was as unpredictable as a river. People could come into one's life, then leave just as easily. But Rinka knew she would never, ever forget Masaomi. She owed him far too much, and in her case, she had made a promise to him. Rinka drew back from Masaomi's corpse, which was slowly cooling. Her shoulders shook and more tears sluiced down her cheeks, tears she didn't bother to wipe away. The front of Masaomi's kimono was damp from Rinka's protracted sobbings, but she didn't suppose that mattered too much, not when she considered the grim task before her. She didn't want to do it. The thought turned her stomach, but she had promised. She had told Masaomi she would honor his final request, and she didn't want to go back on her word. Rinka sat on her haunches for a few moments, looking down at Masaomi's corpse. She inhaled. Then, before she had the time to change her mind, she leant in. She extended her right hand, her clothes unfurled. And with a sick, wet squelch, she sank her clothed hand into Masaomi's chest. Her claws were sharp and dark like obsidian, and they pierced the fabric of Masaomi's kimono easily enough, rending it in two like paper. Masaomi's skin too tore asunder beneath Rinka's clothes. Rinka was hardly aware of her own strength, never having cause to use it, but the sheer ease with which she eviscerated Masaomi made Rinka shudder. Her hand, for already red, was soon steeped in blood. Bits of viscera caught under her nails, but the jerk of her hand was able to sever them. Rinka turned her attention to Masaomi's ribs next. Rinka exposed them to the air, several white elegant arches which protected his cardiovascular muscle in the middle. Rinka knew little about human anatomy, but she knew where the heart was. She had heard Masaomi's heart beat against hers when he had cradled her close, had been lulled to sleep by its regular humming when, after awakening from her nightmares, Masaomi had pulled her into his arms. The regularity of Masaomi's heartbeat had been a great comfort to Rinka. To her, it had not symbolized his mortality, but his strength despite his seeming fragility. His ability to endure no matter what. Masaomi hadn't been able to endure his sickness, for he had finally passed. His heart had given out. But Rinka would see that it was repurposed properly. She was going to give it a new home, just as Masaomi had wanted. Rinka snapped Masaomi's ribs as if they were salted crackers. They splintered, wrenched in twain between Rinka's hand, and Masaomi's heart was soon exposed. Rinka examined it for a few moments, as entranced as she had been on that night when shooting stars had streaked across the sky. There was something oddly beautiful about Masaomi's heart, despite how slimy it looked, how sleek and how wet. So this was what had kept Masaomi alive for so many years. This was what Rinka had to thank for the half a decade she had spent with her father. Half a decade? It was 3 years for. Were it not for this muscle, which looked so unassuming, just like Masaomi himself, Rinka's life would have taken a very different trajectory. There was a degree of reverence in the way Rinka let her fingers skim across Masaomi's heart. She exhaled. Then, very softly, she thanked him, the man who had made so many sacrifices for her sake, and who had adored her above all else.
Thank you for everything, Father!
It was with these words of thanks on her lips that Rinka squeezed. Then she tore. She wrenched Masaomi's heart from its cavity with ease, as a child might pluck a flower from the earth. Where did I get the teeth from? Spattering her hand and her clothes with even more gore. The heart had seemed larger, somehow, inside Masaomi's chest. Outside it, in Rinka's palm, it seemed much too small to keep a grown man alive for so many years. Humans might have considered themselves a superior species, but they were awfully fragile. True. Masaomi had been more fragile than most, but he had done so much for Rinka. He had made endless sacrifices for her. This was just one more of many. Rinka inhaled the smell of iron heavy in the air, inside her nostrils. She shuddered. Then she dipped her head. She parted her lips. Then she opened her mouth and began to feed. The question is, what's the story? Oh. Oh. You know what? Let's do it in one more video. Because I have questions. And the questions might be over here. And also, who knows what's behind the locked areas? There are 2 of them. I'm curious. Yeah, let's get to epilogue tomorrow. Absolutely. Because there are questions on my mind, and I would probably say not only on my mind as well, that need answers. Like, for example, did what Masaomi told his daughter come true? Did, like, eating his heart maybe allow her in a way to live as a human and so on? I'm curious. But to make you curious as well, we will wait a day. So, hopefully I'll see you tomorrow for the epilogue. Bye bye!